We are 2 months into our study through the book of Proverbs. We have 1 week left after today. Next week's topic is on faith, the importance of trusting God. Today's topic, though, it's a tough one. It's a challenging one. We're going to be talking about anger, specifically anger management. Now, it's a topic that we cannot avoid when we look at the book of Proverbs, because you look at words like anger, temper, rage. Those words are just throughout the book. And so as we look at each of those 31 chapters, there are just too many verses to avoid this topic. That doesn't mean it's an easy one. And here are a couple of reasons why. First of all, this is a tough topic for me personally. It's one of those things that I have struggled with anger. It's still a day-to-day battle. And so it's a tough one for me personally. So understand, everything we talk about today, I have preached to myself long before I've shared it with you this morning. The second thing, there's a lot of people that will say that, well, anger isn't necessarily a sin. Now, I'm not going to argue that point. Biblically, I get it. But here's something that I hope that you will look at. When we look at the book of Proverbs, and you look at this topic of anger, of venting and rage and temper, every single time that it's addressed in the book of Proverbs, it's talking about getting that under control and getting some reins on that. So I think that's important for us to keep in mind today. The third thing is that, well, we're an angry people, especially now. Have you noticed that? It's almost like we enjoy picking a fight, how quickly, even on social media, that people will get in a battle, in a fight, and express this anger. They don't even know the other person. They've never even met. And here we are, but that's just this kind of an example of what we're seeing. Now, I could name right now a dozen words or topics or statements. They are red hot button topics. In fact, I could say that. I could talk about COVID-19. I could talk about masks. Could talk about a number of different things. And man, it just lights people up, right? Oh, by the way, we're having an election in a couple of months. You see, that would just ignite some passions among people, and not necessarily in a healthy way. And then there's this fourth idea, and on our screen I have entitled this episodal versus persistent. Let me explain that if I can. This really comes from an article that is published in the Atlantic. This is part of that article. Let's read this together. America has always been an angry nation. We are a country born of revolution. Combat on the battlefields, in newspapers, at the ballot box. It has been with us from the start. American history is punctuated by episodes in which abbreviated parties have settled their differences not through conversation, but with guns. And yet, our political system was cleverly designed to maximize the beneficial effects of anger. All right, so we need to know that. In fact, this article goes on. Let me read just another part of this if I can. The Bill of Rights guarantees that we can argue with one another in the public square through a free press and an open court. The separation of powers forces our representatives in government to arrive at policy through disagreement, negotiation, and accommodation. Even the country's mythology is rooted in anger. The American dream is, in a sense, an optimistic reframing of the discontent felt by people who were unwilling to accept the circumstances that life had handed them. Friends, that's powerful. So we go back and we think about that, and we think about how much of our country today has been founded on the fact that there were times when we became discontented. We became angry over the way that we were being treated. That's the history of our country. But yet this article goes on to talk about episodal versus persistent. When we talk about episodal, we're talking about episodes, an event. We think about the Boston Tea Party. We think about the Revolutionary War. We think about the Civil War. We think about the bombing of Pearl Harbor. Those were events that aroused a passion in us and led to a battle because there was an ideology, there was a belief, there was a fundamental, foundational something that had been shaken and stirred, and we had to address it. But the difference now, and this is what this article in The Atlantic talks about, the difference now, though, is that it's not episodal, but we have now moved to a point where this anger is seen as persistent. One psychology professor says that it is a constant drumbeat in our lives. I think that's an interesting phrase. We want to keep that with us because that really does describe today. That's why we are people that are so quick to argue with strangers on Facebook, or why emotions ignite at the mention of election, coronavirus statistics, or this mandatory mask ordinance. You see, for some of you, your face is likely already turned red just because I mentioned those things. Your blood pressure's gone up a few points. So here's what I hope we can do. I hope we can bring it down and hope we can let the Bible guide us through a path to correctly deal with this emotion, what really is a reaction to events, people, and circumstances. Let's talk about anger management, how to get this thing under control, shall we? Let's begin with our memory verse this morning. Today's memory verse is Proverbs chapter 16, verse 32. This morning I'm reading from the Revised Standard Version for this particular verse. He who is slow to anger is better than the mighty, and he who rules his spirit than he who takes a city. You see, there are times that we need to be angry. But we have to remember, I'm reminded of these words from Aristotle. He said, anyone can become angry. That's easy. But to be angry with the right person at the right time, for the right purpose, and in the right way, that is not within everyone's power. And that is not easy. Proverbs 16, verse 32, our memory verse, says that the person who can control his or her anger is stronger than the great warrior who is able to capture a city. Ruling our spirits means that we keep our emotions in check. We exercise self-control. Now, as we talk about and think about all these verses in Proverbs that deal with anger, most of them warn against an explosive anger. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 17 says, a quick-tempered person does foolish things, and the one who devises evil schemes is hated. The quick-tempered person does what? Foolish things. Just a few verses down in Proverbs 14, verse 29, whoever is patient has great understanding, but the one who is quick-tempered displays folly. One translation puts the last part of the verse 29 this way, but anyone who gets angry quickly shows how foolish he is. Bill Hybels calls this quick-tempered man a spewer. I like that. A spewer has no problem letting his or her anger spew out of their mouth. The spewer gets angry, it's like water bursting through a dam. Slam the door, hit the wall, kick the dog. This is the person who enraged, and this is a problem. This is the person who enraged may hit their spouse or their child. Now, even if it's not physical, we need to understand, because this is serious. Even if this is not physical, this type of anger can have long-lasting mental and emotional effects, scars on our families. This spewer often leaves, I like this phrase, a trail of damage, hurting people in his or her wake. If you can picture a tornado going through an area, and the damage that a tornado leaves in its path. Just reckless abandonship as it destroys trees, land, and homes, and the lives of people. That's what happens when a person is angry, and that anger quickly grows out of control. Again, let's look at a couple of more passages in Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 22, verse 24 says, "Do not make friends with a hot-tempered person. Do not associate with one easily angered, or you may learn their ways and get yourself ensnared." Proverbs chapter 29, verse 11 tells us, "Fools give full vent to their rage, but the wise bring calm in the end." If I could just sum this up, a spewer is a dangerous person to be around. He gives, as Scripture has told us, full vent to his anger. Now, people with anger problems don't always spew outward. Sometimes people with anger problems bottle their anger in. Just like the spewers. But when people get angry, it is over a circumstance, an event, a person. There is something typically that has happened, has been said. There's some type of moment that has created this response or this reaction of anger. Simply put, someone has been wronged, or at least feels as if they have been wronged. Now, the spewer speaks even without thinking. The bottler, though, prides himself in never being angry. She never loses her temper. Now, that doesn't mean that the anger doesn't exist. It's just buried. The people that bottle up anger, this is like burying toxic waste in the ground and walking away and just thinking because it's out of sight, out of mind, that it doesn't exist. But friends, that's not the truth. We have to understand that it will leak. It will eventually come out. And yes, it is toxic. It will cause a problem. Now, bottlers don't vent their rage. They may pout. They may be irritable. They may save up and take out their frustrations on others, perhaps the ones that they love the most at home and with their family. They might withdraw. They may manipulate. They will do, a bottler will do anything except admit, "I am angry." Ask about it, you can almost guarantee that the response is going to be, "I'm not upset. I'm not angry." That's more than likely going to be the response. Now, here's where the two come together. Whether you are a spewer or whether you are a bottler, here's where it all comes together. You have to get rid of the anger. And whether you're spewing it out or if you're bottling it in, you really haven't dealt with the issue of anger. Proverbs chapter 19, verse 19 tells us, "A hot-tempered person must pay the penalty. Rescue them, and you'll have to do it again." What's the wise man saying here? The person with an anger problem never learns. You keep spewing it out, but you still got an anger problem. You bottle it in, but you still have an anger problem. We need to learn how to address this anger problem. Now, that's the problem, but here's the thing. We have to find a solution. We have to find an answer. Now, when we look at our vehicles, think about it. You've gotten in your car, you turn it on, and there is a check engine light. If that check engine light comes on, it means that there is something going on in that vehicle. It could be minor, but it could be major. There is something that needs attention. And if we go to a mechanic, there is a computer that can be plugged in and can quickly diagnose the problem. It can be repaired. Anger is a lot like that. Anger is like that check engine light coming on. There's a problem. It needs to be properly addressed. You can't just take a piece of masking tape and put it over your dash and cover up the light and just think that the whole problem's going to go away. It doesn't work that way. So it is with anger. We can't spew it out or bottle it up and act like it doesn't exist. it's still a problem that needs to be addressed in our lives. So when we're looking at this, we need to understand just that check engine light. The problem with a vehicle, if not properly addressed, it could be catastrophic. It could render that vehicle completely useless. But understand too, if we don't deal with anger, man, we can destroy relationships. We can also harm ourselves physically. And there is a connection with anger and with physical health problems. Problems like high blood pressure, depression, anxiety, and heart disease. In other words, deal with the problem. The check engine light is on. Let's get it checked out and let's work up a proper diagnosis and solution, shall we? All right, we've talked about the problem, we've identified it, but we need to look at some good practical answers. And that's what the whole book of Proverbs is about, right? Good, practical answers. And so let's get started. We've got 5 different points to cover. And the first one is really, it's simple. Well, it's simple to read. It's not always simple to implement. We have to acknowledge that there's a problem. We need to admit when we are angry. Now, some of you are sitting there thinking, well, anyone would know when I'm angry. It's pretty clear to everybody. That's great. You know, everybody else may know that you're angry. But do you know that you're angry? Have you stopped and said to yourself, I'm angry? Because if we'll do that, that's a good first step in coming up with a healthy solution to the issue. Because then we can say, I'm angry about this. Now what am I going to do? We have a choice in how we respond. We don't have to blow up. We don't have to bottle it in. Anger does not have to be destructive. Anger, used in the right way, can be quite constructive by resolving problems. Anger used in a right way, it can improve a condition, a social condition in life. It can actually strengthen relationships, but it has to be used in a right way. All right, so we have to admit it. We have to say, I'm angry. The second step is this. Hold on. No, really. Hold on. We need to refrain from our initial, immediate response. Proverbs chapter 19, verse 11 tells us, a man's discretion makes him slow to anger, and it is his glory to overlook a transgression. Now, the English Standard Version puts the first part of the verse this way. Good sense makes one slow to anger. The word here is discretion, good sense. It's talking about prudence, insight, understanding. In other words, we're using this wisdom that we've been spending 2 months talking about. Wisdom helps us to slow down, to hold on, to refrain from our immediate reaction, that immediate response. Now, waiting, boy, that can save us. It can save us from saying the wrong thing, from dealing with it in a wrong manner. I'm reminded of these great words from Mark Twain. He said, it takes me a long time to lose my temper, but once lost, I couldn't find it with a dog. I like that. It's important for us to hold on from our immediate response, because once we lose it, it can be awfully difficult to regain our composure. Proverbs chapter 25, verse 28 says, like a city whose walls are broken is a person who lacks self-control. Like a city whose walls have been broken through is a man without self-control. There's no defense. Man, it's something that's been breached. It takes an awful lot of effort to repair that. So, friends, let's admit when we are angry. Let's hold on, refrain from our immediate response. But then we need to stop and ask this question. Why am I angry? We know that we're angry. We've already admitted that. But we need to specifically ask, why are we angry? Locate the focus. Now, this is just deeper. This is deeper than asking, what happened? Well, we can identify that. We can do that. Obviously, there was some statement, there was some action, an event, a circumstance, some type of injustice. Something prompted this response, this reaction of anger. That's the what. But we need to know why. Why did this cause this response, this reaction in me? Perhaps it was a belief, a value, some foundational issue that was violated. To learn from our anger, we have to understand what is the root cause. What's the focus? Not just what, but why am I angry? All right. Man, we're making great progress. We need to admit we're angry. Hold on. Refrain from that immediate response. Ask why. Why am I angry? And then let's review, let's look at our choices. What are my options? You see, even if the circumstances are the same, the things that have happened, we don't always react the same way. Have you noticed that? There are some days that it's like nothing could make me mad. But then there are other days that it's like the smallest thing could be like rubbing sandpaper. It creates this response of anger. But when that happens, we have choices. We don't have to respond in an out-of-control, explosive, full-vent rage. We don't have to do that. We have options available to us. So we need to understand that. It may be, that we've been hurt by this before. Whatever has happened, we were extremely hurt by it before. And now that it's happening before us again, we're like, well, this won't happen again. This won't end like it did before. But we need to stop and let's review our choices so that we can choose wisely. Look at a couple of Proverbs, shall we? Proverbs chapter 15, verse 1 says, "A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger." So we have an opportunity in how we respond. This choice that we have can determine how this ends. If we respond in a healthy, constructive manner, we could resolve the issue. We could live out the Ephesians 4 passage where Paul would warn us, "In your anger, do not sin." So we have an opportunity to do that. That's what Proverbs 15:1 tells us. Proverbs chapter 14, verse 9 says, "Fools make fun of guilt, but the godly acknowledge it and seek reconciliation." Friends, we have choices. We don't have to just say, well, I'm going to give him a piece of my mind. We don't have to approach every issue like that. We have choices available to us. Perhaps you've heard about the baseball game. It took place between the Baltimore Orioles and the Boston Red Sox in Boston in 1894. The gentleman's name from the Orioles was John McGraw. He got in a fight with Boston's third baseman. Now, the dugouts quickly emptied. It was a full-blown brawl on the field. But fans in the stands got involved in it, and they started fighting. I mean, it was just a total ruckus. Somebody went and set the stadium on fire. The entire stadium that day burned to the ground. But not just the stadium. 107 buildings in the city of Boston burned that day. All because of one moment, one event, a fight that got out of control, and it turned into full vent rage, destroying part of a city. And we don't think that anger can cause problems? It can cause problems in our families, among friends, in our community. And anger can certainly cause problems in the church. So you see, that's why this is so important. This is why we need to address this issue. And so we've talked about 4 things. We need to look at this 5th. Admit our problem. We need to admit when we're angry. hold on, refrain from that initial response. We need to ask the deep question of why. We know what has happened and we know that we are angry, but now we need to ask, why am I angry? Let's review our choices, recognizing that we don't have to respond in an unhealthy way. We recognize verses that talk about how a gentle answer can lead to some reconciliation. And so then we come down here to our final point where we need to take constructive action. Now that's where we've reviewed some choices. So here are just a couple of things that we can do. And we need to understand this, that we have a choice of doing nothing. Something has made us angry, but when we think about it in perspective, it's really not something that was that big a deal. And it's not something that has to be addressed. In other words, I'm going to let it slide. And there are times that that's a perfectly wise solution. It may be, though, that we decide that we need to enter in that conversation with someone. When we do that, understand this. It may be that as everything is uncovered and laid bare and put on the table, it may be that part of that misunderstanding was our fault. And so it may be that the words we have entered into this conversation because we were angry, but we may have to say, I'm sorry. And we need to be prepared to do that. We also need to be prepared that it may be that the other person, after hearing this, says, I am so sorry, would you please forgive me? And so it may be that we have to say, I'm sorry, or it may be that we need to be ready to say, I forgive you. But finally, understand this. Not every issue will be resolved. It may be that something has happened and it's made us angry. But that initial conversation, it does not bear any fruit. It was an important seed to plant. And in one day and in a time and in a particular season, it might lead to some reconciliation and to a better understanding. But we might not leave that conversation that day with everything intact. So we need to understand that as we strive to take constructive action. But what a joy it is to know that if something has made us angry and we've worked to deal with that, and we've admitted it, we've refrained from that immediate response, we've answered why I'm angry, we've looked at our choice, we took constructive action. But as a result of that, to think about making life better, whether it's for a person, a family, a church, or a community, because we chose to take constructive action rather than destructive action. We can use anger in a positive way to make a difference in the lives of those around us.